I'll be using this laptop as the host and this laptop as the client. The host will send a command over to the client. The client will then take an image and send that data back to the host. The host then will overwrite this blank image file here with the data that it received. These two laptops aren't connected in any way except for that they share the same, they're connected to the same Wi-Fi. This is obviously not a hack, just sending images over Python for fun. Let's run the programs. And as you can see, we get a prompt on the host program. And if I enter anything at all, it will send the command to take an image. And it has already sent the data back. We'll open the file to see how it has overwritten. And as you can see, it has overwritten that blank image with the data we got from the other computer. So this is the program that will be used to get the image data from the other program. So first we import the socket library, which is a standard library in Python. Then we create a socket object using this line of code. Then we bind that object to this specific address. So what that does is it sets up a connection that any other program can connect to if they use this specific address. So what getHostName does is it returns the system that the Python program is being run on, which in my case is my laptop's name. This number here is the port number, which will also be needed to connect to this code. Next, we set up a variable, and I will explain what this is used for later in the code. Then we have a while true loop, which is an infinite loop. The first thing in the while true loop is the command sock.listen. What that does is it makes this socket it shows that this socket is available for any incoming requests by other programs or clients. Then in this try loop, which I'll explain why it's there later, we have the client address equals sock.accept. What sock.accept does, it accepts any incoming connections, and it returns the client that we accepted and the address, the IP address of that client. Next, what we do now is we send the message capture to the client, which will be our other program. And in that program, that will take the photo and send it back. And so when it sends back, we want to receive that chunk of data. So we do client.receive that many bits, which is exactly how many bits the other program will be sending for each chunk. Next, we have this line of code called sock.setTimeout.01. What this does is, if it doesn't receive any data after 0.01 seconds, it just doesn't listen anymore and continues for the rest of the code. But since this is a while loop, once it's done with this, it comes back to receiving it anyway. So it doesn't completely prohibit this from receiving any data. What I did that so that because otherwise, without that single line of code, this socket object does not doesn't receive any of the other chunks except for the first chunk of data that the other code sends. So anyway, once we've got that data, which is in a bytes format, we add that to the sections part. So sections was defined up here. We add that to the sections part, but instead of a bytes object, we add it as the string version of that bytes object. Then we add 1 to n, so n plus equals 1, and that is to indicate how many chunks we have. So once we've received all the chunks, which is 4 chunks, as then we break this loop, which basically ends the infinite loop. So once it finishes, once it gets all the 4 chunks and the loop is finished, it runs this part of the code. What this does is it opens the file retrieved.png in a write binary mode. So this file here is already on my laptop, is already in the same directory as this program, and we open it as write binary, and what we do is we write the all the data that we got, all the image data that we got. And since sections is in a string format, not in a bytes format, we have to evaluate the sections and basically make it evaluate the bytes object inside of it instead of the string itself. So we write the bytes version of the string. Then once we finished writing the image, we close the file. And that's all for this code here. So this is the code that will be sending the image data that it gets to the other laptop, or the other code. So first it imports socket, which is the module that we'll be using to connect the 2 laptops or codes. Then we import the module CV2, which is not a standard library, so it has to be installed. This will be used to take the images. Next, we import OS, which I'll talk about later. So first, we create a socket object, and then we connect that socket object to this address, which was created by the other program. In the other program, I did sock.getHostName, but in here, I just put the name of the laptop in a string, because I know what the other laptop's name is. Then I also have the port number that we are connecting to, which is the exact same port number as the other program binded to. Then we have a while true loop, which waits for a message from the other program. And when it gets the message capture, which we send in the other program, we break the loop, and that allows the rest of the code to run. So until we receive this part of the program won't run. As soon as we receive this infinite loop breaks and allows the rest of the code to run. Anyways, once we get that message, we take a video, basically a video capture, and we get the data that the camera reads. So we really only need this frame data that we get. That's the data that the camera captures. Anyways, then we destroy all the windows using this command, and then we write an image called frame.png using the frame data that we got. And this basically writes that image onto the directory that this program is in. Then we release the camera and then create an empty bytes object which opens the image that we just created and reads that data. Then we create 2 variables, both I and n, both set to 0, and I'll explain what they do later. So then we create a while true loop, and again it's an infinite loop that continues to do this process. So first we send the first chunk of data, which is this many bits. We send bytes, that object we created here, and we index it. So we send I, which at the moment is 0, plus this number. And that number is exactly the amount of bits that the other a laptop is expecting. And we have to send it in chunks because otherwise it would give a memory load to the other laptop, since socket can't receive that much information. Can't receive the entire image worth of information of data in one go. So I have to send it in chunks and combine those chunks together to create the entire image. Anyway, then we increment I by that many bits. So every time this loop is it loops, every time it loops, you send the next chunk of data in the next chunk of data that we get from the image. Then we increment n by 1, and this is basically the chunk counter, chunk counter variable. So when n reaches 4, which is enough to send most of the image data, we send the remaining bits of data that's left. So once that sends that, we break this infinite loop, and then we permanently delete that image we created earlier. So it leaves no trace at all. It leaves no trace of this image file that we created. So that's all for this program here.